When I was 7, I brought something home with me. I didn't know it at the time, of course. I just thought I'd had a bad dream, or maybe somebody had said something at school, or I'd watched one of my sister's scary movies that I wasn't supposed to. But looking back, the night at my friend Kira's house, that's when everything started. It was a normal sleepover. We stayed up late watching movies, sneaking snacks, the usual kid stuff. Kira's house was old, much older than mine, with creaky floorboards and tall windows that rattled in the wind. Her room was in the attic, which always creeped me out a little. The stairs up to it were narrow, almost claustrophobic, and her mom warned us not to run up or down them, especially at night, because of how easy it was to trip and how bad a fall could be. But being kids, we didn't listen. Just before midnight, we dared each other to go down into the basement. Kira said there was a secret down there, and she would tell me when we got there. I don't remember whose idea it was, but I wasn't going to chicken out. We raced down the stairs to the basement, which was dark and damp and colder than the rest of the house, like most basements. But it had this thick, stale air, like something had been left down there for too long. The little overhead bulb did little to brighten the space, and the corners stayed cloaked in darkness. Once we were settled under the light, Kira told me the secret of the Shadow Man. She said her older brother had seen him down here once. I laughed it off, but I was genuinely scared. The goosebumps on my arms gave me away, and we didn't stay long, but long enough for me to feel like something had brushed against my arm on the stairs, even though I couldn't see anything there. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept feeling like I wasn't alone, like someone or something was standing in the corner of the bedroom watching us. When I went home the next day, I thought I'd shake that feeling, but it never left. I didn't know it then, but I came to learn that something had followed me home. I first noticed only little things. I'd see movement out of the corner of my eye or hear things when I was alone, like papers shifting in another room, or cabinets closing in the kitchen when no one was in there. There were nights I'd wake up feeling like someone was standing right next to my bed, staring down at me. Or I'd wake up to the feeling of someone getting off the bed, but the room was empty. I tried telling my mom, but she brushed it off as just nightmares. My parents were fighting a lot then, and I had a feeling they might be getting a divorce. I stopped talking about it, but the thing was always there. I could feel it lingering just close by me. As I got older, it became part of me, almost. I got used to it, used to the feeling of not being alone in a room even when I was, used to waking in the middle of the night not being able to see a presence, but feel it like it was just out of reach. I even gave it a name, It, because what else do you call something that doesn't have a face? But it wasn't always quiet. When it was angry, everything changed. It would start small, lights flickering, doors slamming shut on their own. I'd feel my body freeze, every muscle locking up, like it had grabbed hold of me, paralyzing me in place with its grip. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was the anger. I could feel it inside me, like heat bubbling up from my core. It was furious, but not at me, at everything else. I couldn't control it, couldn't stop it. It was like it was using me, and I was powerless to fight back. The feeling was the worst just before my parents divorced, and I started thinking it was my own anger. But like I said, at that point, it felt just like an extension of me. Once, when I was 15, I got into an argument with my mom. It was stupid, over nothing really. But as she was yelling at me over the phone, My vision blurred and the room felt heavy, like the air was gel. I must have blacked out, but when I came to, I was stabbing the kitchen wall with the biggest knife we had, deep gouges in the wood I couldn't have made without something more powerful controlling me. I felt the pain first and realized my hand had slid down the blade. I needed 14 stitches. Since then, I've learned to keep my temper, to keep it calm. But there are still nights when I wake up and it's there, standing at the foot of my bed. I can't see it, not really, but I feel it. The weight of its presence pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. It doesn't speak, but I know it's there, and I know it's still angry. It feels like static in my brain. I think it wants me to lose control like that again. Sometimes it scratches at my skin, deep scratches enough to leave marks, but they vanish by morning. But the feeling and the pain doesn't. I've woken up with bruises, and once I woke up with a piece of glass in my mouth, and I didn't even feel the pain until I tasted the blood. I know what you're thinking. Why don't you just get help? Exorcism, therapy, something to get rid of it. But I've tried. Believe me, after 34 years, I've tried. Priests, psychics, even doctors, all of them left more terrified than they were when they came in. I've even been hospitalized. But after every treatment, every therapy, it would be furious with me. The nights after were the worst. Doors would rattle, my bed would shake, and I'd hear the static screaming in my head. I'd find strange symbols scrawled in the dust of my room, symbols I'd never seen before. I felt like it wanted me to keep it secret. Now I just live with it. I've learned that as long as I don't push back, as long as I don't challenge it, things stay quiet. Most days, I can almost pretend that I'm normal, that I'm like everyone else. But deep down, I know better, because it's still here, inside me, always pushing me to lose control. It was a perfect day for a field trip. The Children's Museum is one of those places that kept kids engaged for hours. Lots of interactive exhibits, bright colors, a full day of learning disguised as play. By the time we were gathering them up to leave, they were all exhausted, barely able to keep their eyes open. The bus waited out front, the driver looking just as worn out as the kids. I was busy herding the last few stragglers toward the door, making sure we weren't leaving anyone behind. And that's when I saw her, one of my students standing near the entrance, staring back at me. She had long, dark hair hanging over a black coat that nearly swept the ground. I thought it was Marisol, but Marisol's coat was purple. I'd left my glasses back at the school, and without them, I couldn't see that far. I waved her toward the bus, but instead of coming toward me, she turned and stepped back inside the museum. The black coat swished behind her as she vanished through the doors. I frowned, confused. Marisol was lovely. Something must be wrong. I rushed to the entrance, peeking inside to find her. My eyes scanned the lobby, but it was empty, with just a few museum staff tidying up near the front desk. There was no sign of Marisol. A wave of anxiety hit me. The docent, a cheerful woman with bright lipstick and a name tag that read Linda, noticed me standing there looking around frantically. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice chipper, like she'd spent the entire day on a sugar rush. "I think one of my girls is still here," I went on to describe Marisol. Linda's face lit up in a strange, almost too enthusiastic way. "Oh, that's not one of your students. Katie must have shown herself to you. How wonderful." I blinked at her. Katie? No, I don't have a Katie in my class. Linda gave a little laugh, like I'd said something funny. Oh, no, dear. Katie doesn't go to your school. She's our special guest. The way she said special made me feel uncomfortable. What are you talking about? I asked, my heart pounding. Who is Katie? Linda leaned in conspiratorially, like she was sharing a juicy secret. Katie's been here for years. No one knows where she came from. We just see her sometimes. She likes to show herself to people who are good with kids. Her eyes twinkled as if I should be honored. What do you mean, shows herself? Linda's smile got impossibly big, as if I'd asked the best question in the world. Katie's not exactly alive anymore, she said, still using that maddeningly cheery tone. But she's very friendly. She just loves when the children come to visit. I took a step back, my stomach twisting in knots. Are you telling me I just saw a ghost? Linda nodded, completely unfazed by my horror. Isn't it wonderful? She must really like your group. Before I could process what she had said, I felt a small hand slip into mine. I looked down and saw Jacqueline, a quiet girl from my class, standing beside me. Her face was pale and her eyes were wide. Did you see her too? She whispered, her voice trembling. My mouth went dry. Who, Jacqueline? Jacqueline looked back toward the stairs at the far end of the lobby, where the lights were already off for the day. Her grip on my hand tightened. Katie, she said, her voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. She told me if I jumped down the stairs, I could stay with her forever. I stared at Jacqueline, horrified at what she'd just said. What? I managed to choke out, my heart racing faster than ever. Jacqueline nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. She said she's lonely and she wants me to stay. Her voice was quivering, and she looked at me, pleading, I don't want to stay. I looked back at the dark stairs, half expecting to see the little girl in the black coat watching us from there. Jacqueline, don't listen to her, okay? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We're leaving. Now. I practically dragged Jacqueline toward the door, my mind spinning. Hurrying outside was like stepping out of a suffocating cloud and back into the real world, where the sun was hot, the bus was idling, and the kids were laughing as they talked quietly together. This was normal, not what was going on in that museum. But something had changed. The thought of this Katie whispering those words to Jacqueline, "You can stay with me," sent chills down my spine. Linda waved us off cheerfully as if nothing had happened, as if we hadn't just encountered something far beyond our understanding. But as I helped the kids onto the bus, I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. I didn't know who or what Katie really was. All I knew was that we were leaving her behind, and I was never bringing my students back to this museum again. I glanced down at Jacqueline, her little hand still clutched tightly in mine, and I silently promised that I wouldn't let Katie take her. I wouldn't let her take anyone. Every night the dream begins the same way. I stand at the entrance of the cave. Its jagged rocky mouth gapes wide, an endless pit of darkness, and I can feel the cold air seeping out like an exhale from something ancient and forgotten. The wind howls around me, but inside it's silent and oppressively quiet in a way that makes me know I shouldn't be here. Every fiber of my being tells me to turn around, to walk away, but I never do. I can't. Something is always behind me. And at first, I never see it. I just feel it, the way you know when someone is standing too close. And in those moments, the slow creeping cold inches up my spine. The shadows around me shift, crawling closer, I tried to move, but I can't. My legs are rooted to the earth. Then comes the noise. It's not a growl or a snarl. It's worse. It's the sound of something slinking, slithering, something too large to move that quietly. A scrape against rock, the hiss of breath too close to my ear, and then it shoves me. The force sends me plummeting forward into the mouth of the cave. I scream, but it's swallowed by the dark. My arms flail, trying to grab hold of anything, but there's nothing, just endless blackness and the sensation of falling faster and faster. My body slams against jagged edges. Bones crack, skin splits. I can feel blood pouring from my wounds, but the pain doesn't stop. It never stops. The fall seems endless, and all the while I hear it behind me, the thing that pushed me. It's not enough that it shoved me into the abyss. It's hunting. It's keeping pace. No, pushing me deeper. Every time I try to slow down to stop the fall, I feel it at my back, forcing me faster and faster into the darkness. The worst part is that slithering sound, like it can grip the walls as I tumble. I can't understand what it wants, but I know it's enjoying my torture, like a cat with a mouse. It hates me. It wants me to fall. It wants me to suffer. My bones splinter and my skin shreds against the rocks, and still it pushes. I never reach the bottom. That's when I wake up, always with a jolt, drenched in sweat, my body twisted in the sheets. My heart pounds so hard in my chest it feels like it's going to explode. But waking up is no comfort, not anymore. Last night, the dream was worse. The fall was longer, the thing behind me closer. It's slithering closer. When I woke up, I lay there in the dark on my stomach, trying to shake off the terror. My body ached. My muscles were tense and trembling, and I could still feel that pressure on my back, like it had followed me out of the dream. The room was too quiet. It was the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. Something felt wrong. I was awake. It was supposed to be over. That's when I heard it, slithering. Soft at first, lightly against the floor. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, residual terror from the dream. But I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The sound came again, closer this time. A slow, deliberate sound inching closer along the ground near my bed. I forced myself to look. The shadows in the corner of my room weren't just shadows. They were moving. Something was there, low to the ground, expanding towards me, barely visible in the darkness, but its outline was unmistakable. It wasn't human. Its limbs were too long, too thin, and it slithered, dragging itself across the floor, inching closer to my bed. I wanted to scream, to move, to do something, but I couldn't. That pressure on my back held me in place. I was frozen. The thought, "keep falling," echoed in my mind. The thing slithered closer, crawling right over the edge of my bed. I could see it now. Its skin was reptilian across long, serpentine arms. Its snake-like eyes were hollow pits of darkness that seemed to suck in the light around them. And its mouth was full of teeth. Too many teeth, all jagged and sharp, twisted into a grin that made my stomach churn. As it slithered closer, I realized I had a chance to break free. I scrambled out of bed, tripping over the sheets, crashing to the floor. I looked back, expecting to see it lunging towards me, but it was gone. I was alone and awake. But even as I started to relax, to catch my breath, I knew that sleep would return me to that cave, and it would be there to push me again. It all started off innocently enough, or at least that's what I thought. When I first moved into the apartment, it was a pretty standard setup. The rent was decent, the place was in a good part of town, and my roommate Tara was quiet and kept mostly to herself. She had a habit of smoking a ton of weed, but honestly, I didn't care much. She wasn't loud or messy, and we got along well enough, two strangers sharing space without too much interaction. Things were fine for a while. Then she met him, Kyle. He was creepy, always slinking into the apartment, giving off this weird energy like he was waiting for something to happen. He didn't talk to me much, but when he did, there was something about the way he stared at me, like he was sizing me up or something. His eyes always seemed a little too focused, a little too intense. They'd sit in Tara's room for hours, getting high and watching horror movies. The sound of TV screams and eerie music would bleed through the walls late into the night. It got to a point where he was staying over so often that I half joked to her that maybe Kyle should start chipping in on rent. Tara didn't take that well at all. She said she was only staying until her lease was up and then they'd be gone. I thought she'd overreacted to a simple suggestion, but whatever. I let it go. A few nights before they left, something weird happened. I woke up sometime after 2 a.m. to the sound of the smoke alarm blaring in Tara's room. When I opened my door, Tara was standing in the hallway, smoke trailing from her room. She had this weird look on her face, a combination of annoyance and something else, but I couldn't place it. "It's fine," she said, her voice flat. "Just go back to bed. I accidentally set the alarm off." Something about her had started making my skin crawl, but I was too tired to argue at that moment. The smoke alarm stopped, and I headed back to my room. The next morning, I checked the trash can in the kitchen, hoping for a clue about what had happened. And there it was, partially burned, curled up at the edges. A Ouija board. They had tried to burn a Ouija board in her room. I didn't ask. They were moving out soon, and I figured I'd be done with both of them soon enough. After Tara and her creepy boyfriend finally moved out, I felt a huge sense of relief. But that feeling didn't last. In fact, that's when things started to get worse. I started noticing her old bedroom door opening and closing by itself. At first, I thought it was a draft. Old apartments do that sometimes, right? But then the lights in her room began turning on and off at random. I'd come home from work, the apartment would be completely dark, but Tara's old room would be lit up like someone had been in there. Only no one had been. One afternoon, I decided to clean out her room for the next tenant. When I opened her closet, I was horrified to find 4 black candles, wax dripped all over the shelf, and a single white one in the middle. They were placed in a perfect circle, like some kind of ritual had been performed. I didn't want to deal with it. I threw them all in the trash, shut the closet door, and finished cleaning the room. But all day long, the sight of those candles nagged at me. The colors, the formation. I finally Googled what their symbolism could mean, and my heart sank when I read this combination of colors was used in satanic rituals. That night, things got worse. I was in bed, half asleep, when I heard it. The distinct sound of my bedroom doorknob jiggling, like someone was trying to get in. I froze, the hairs on my neck standing up. I lived alone now. No one else had a key. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the door, praying it wouldn't open. It wasn't locked. The jiggling stopped after what felt like an eternity, and the apartment fell back into silence. But the next night, I heard scratching. This low, slow, scraping sound that seemed to be coming from the hallway, like something was digging into the wall. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened my bedroom door. The hallway was empty, but the scratching continued, faint but persistent. I checked every inch of the floor, nothing seemed out of place, until I reached the door to Tara's old room. At the baseboard, the wallpaper was lifted like it had been ripped up at the corner, and there were scratches at the bottom of her door. It hadn't been that way before. I rushed back to my room and closed my door. I rationalized that maybe we had mice or rats, but when it continued throughout the night, I sat on my bed with my light on. This wasn't mice. It sounded intentional. When it finally stopped at first light, I fell asleep from exhaustion. After that night, I slept with my bedroom door locked. I didn't feel safe anymore, like something was in the apartment with me, lurking invisibly in the hallway just beyond the edges of my perception. The nightly scratching in the hallway continued. When I finally found someone to take Tara's room, he noticed the torn wallpaper in the walkthrough. He asked me if I had a cat. Realizing I'd have to explain it to him, I told him about Tara and the events of the last few weeks. I warned him that it was better to keep his doors shut at night, but he laughed it off like I was joking. Jason moved in, and I immediately liked him. He was easygoing, didn't ask many questions, and didn't seem to care about the weird vibe I'd warned him about. I thought maybe it'll be fine this time. Maybe the worst would be over now that someone else was there with me. But it wasn't. My schedule got pretty busy at work, and I was away from the apartment more just after he had moved in. I'd get home, and he'd already be in his room for the night. I also noticed the scratching sound had stopped overnight, and I finally got some good sleep. Jason lasted exactly 1 week. One night, after he'd come home late, I heard him shuffling around in his room, slamming drawers and mumbling to himself. The next morning, he was gone, along with all his stuff, which wasn't much, really. He left no note, no explanation. I texted him, and he didn't answer. Later that afternoon, I did get a message from him, and it was short and to the point. I'm breaking the lease. I can't stay there. Don't ask why. That was it. He didn't explain, didn't offer to pay the rent he owed. He just vanished, leaving me alone with the full rent again. The apartment felt suffocating after he left. It was too quiet during the day, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was always there, just out of sight. The scratching had started up again, and now I swore I heard laughter, barely audible, coming from Tara's old room. The weekend after Jason moved out, I was lying in bed when my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I hadn't seen in a while, Tara's. "I heard your new roommate bailed," the message read. I stared at the screen, unsettled. How would she even know that? Then another text popped up. "Not shocked. It's crowded in there. Guess he couldn't handle what we called for you. It's hilarious that you thought you could just live normally after kicking us out. We made sure you'll always have company. You will never be alone. You'll never need another roommate, ever. It'll stay with you now, always." I stared at the screen, at the demon emojis beside her text. My heart pounded as the words sank in. I sat up in bed, my breath catching in my throat. I read the message over and over, my hands trembling. Tara had done something, summoned something for me. My mind raced as the implications of her words sank in. The burned Ouija board, the candles. The entity wasn't attached to the room or the hallway or the apartment. They'd attached it to me. And no matter where I went, I'd never escape it. I don't know what made me linger behind the group that day. Maybe it was the heat, that oppressive, muggy air that clung to my skin and made every step feel like walking through syrup. Or maybe it was the way the tour guide's voice droning on about the history of the cemetery seemed to fade into the background. I just needed a break, a moment to sit and take it all in. The cemetery was one of those famous ones in New Orleans, the kind with elaborate above-ground tombs that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Marble vaults, moss-covered, ornate but crumbling at the same time. There was something both beautiful and eerie about them, as though the city of the dead was much older and far more permanent than the one we were living in. I found an old wooden bench tucked behind one of the larger mausoleums. It was cooler in the shade, and I could feel my pulse slowing as I sat down. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, letting out a breath, and for a moment everything was still. But then something changed. It was subtle at first, carried on a sudden cool breeze. The heat seemed to dissipate, replaced by an odd, chilling sensation, like I had stepped out of the humid Louisiana afternoon and into a space that didn't quite belong to it. My ears felt strange, like they were stuffed with cotton, and the noise from the tour group faded until it was nothing more than a distant hum, like I was underwater. And then I felt it. Someone sitting beside me. The bench creaked slightly under the new weight, but I hadn't moved. My heart raced, and I turned, instinctively expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. Yet there was no mistaking it. I wasn't alone. Something feminine. I could feel it, not just the presence, but the delicate brush of fabric against my leg, like the edge of a wide, long skirt swishing against me. That sensation was so real, so tangible, that for a split second I almost thought I could see it out of the corner of my eye. Pale fabric, lace maybe, moving ever so slightly in that faint breeze. The air was thick with the smell of perfume. It wasn't anything I recognized, definitely not from our time. It was powdery, floral, but heavy, like something that had been trapped in an old wardrobe for decades. The scent was so overpowering that it made me feel dizzy. My head was light, as though I were teetering on the edge of a daydream. And then the strangest part, an overwhelming sense of urgency. The thought hit me out of nowhere. I have to hurry. It was like an alarm bell going off in my mind in a weird, panicked way. More like I was running out of time. I had to be somewhere. Catch a train, meet someone, get to some destination. I couldn't quite recall. But the feeling gnawed at me, like I was going to miss something vital. Almost like I was in danger. My pulse quickened, my hands gripping the edge of the bench, and I almost stood up. But curiosity took over, and I hesitated. The feeling became more intense. The perfume, the weight on the bench beside me, the sense of a skirt brushing against my leg, that desperate, urgent, sinking feeling of time slipping away. It was all too much. I could barely breathe. And then, as quickly as it had come, it vanished. The presence beside me faded like a cloud that had passed over the sun. The air around me shifted back, thick and humid once again, and I could feel the sweat beading on my skin. The perfume was gone, replaced by the smell of hot stone and damp earth. My ears popped, and suddenly I could hear the tour guide again, his voice echoing from about 50 feet away. I sat there for a moment, staring at the empty space beside me on the bench. The bench itself felt cool, the old wood solid beneath me, but the weight of whatever or whoever had been there was gone. The feeling of urgency faded, but I wondered why I didn't feel unsettled. Somehow, The experience was oddly comforting, like whoever had been there hadn't meant me any harm, just needed me to feel what they felt, maybe to remind me that time is short. I got up slowly, my head still foggy, and joined the tour group again. I didn't say a word, but even as the guide droned on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone had been waiting there for me, that they were still there waiting for someone else to come along and share this moment of urgency or fear, this feeling that they were reliving, waiting to remind someone else that time, even in a place like this, runs out. I'd always been a sucker for a good deal, and the auction that day seemed like the perfect opportunity to get a solid car for cheap. Rows upon rows of cars, trucks, and SUVs lined up, all waiting for someone like me to take them home. I wasn't looking for anything flashy, just something reliable to get me to and from work. And that's when I saw it. A dark blue Toyota, nothing special, but it looked clean and had pretty low mileage for the price. I figured it might have been an impound, or maybe someone couldn't make the payments. It didn't matter, it was for me. The auctioneer gave the usual rundown, the year, the make, the model. It seemed like a safe bet, so I bid on it and won. The paperwork was quick, and soon enough I was driving the car off the lot, feeling pretty damn pleased with myself. But it wasn't long before I noticed things didn't sit right. The first thing was the smell. At first I thought it was just the musty odor of a car that had been sitting for too long. I wondered if it had had some water damage, but even after a solid detailing, it lingered. A heavy, sweet scent, like something was rotting. I scrubbed the seats again, aired them out, sprayed air fresheners, but the smell never fully went away. Then there were the stains I'd found while cleaning. I hadn't noticed them at the auction, but under certain lights I'd see faint, brownish marks on the fabric of the back seat. I tried to convince myself it was just spilled coffee or soda, but the thought of bloodstains crept into my mind. There was something about the way it was splattered, unevenly sprayed, not like a regular coffee spill. One night, about a week after buying the car, I was driving home late from work. It was pitch black outside and the roads were deserted. I was almost home when my phone started ringing. I glanced down. No number, just unknown caller flashing on the screen. I didn't answer. I never answered a call from an unknown caller. Who does? But then it rang again. And again. Finally, I picked it up, annoyed, ready to tell off whatever telemarketer was calling this late. But there was no voice on the other end, just silence. Then after a few seconds, a sound like metal scraping, followed by the faintest whisper. "Where are you taking me?" I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding in my chest. This had to be a prank, I told myself. Someone's screwing with me. I pulled into my driveway, shaken, but trying to keep calm. That's when the door locks started clicking. One by one, first the driver's side, then the passenger's. Click, click, click. I sat there frozen, staring at those locks, watching as they flicked up and down on their own. My fingers fumbled for the keys, hoping I was somehow pressing them accidentally, but there was nothing touching the key fob. I scrambled out of the car, practically sprinting to my front door. I looked out my window at the dark car in the driveway, now completely devoid of life, just a normal-looking Toyota. That night I barely slept, thinking about the strange timing of that call and those locks. The next day, I had to know. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened in that car. So I did some digging with the VIN number, and what I found made my blood run cold. The car had belonged to a man who'd gone missing 2 years ago. He'd never been found, but this car, had been discovered abandoned in a parking garage. Police suspected foul play, but without a body or any solid leads, the case had just gone cold. Suddenly, everything made sense. The smell, the stains, the phone call. Even though I couldn't explain any of it, the car wasn't just a vehicle. It was a crime scene. Maybe even a tomb. I don't know what happened to that guy or where his body ended up, but I knew without a doubt that whatever had been done to him had left something behind. More than stains and smells. I couldn't keep it. The thought of driving that thing, knowing what I knew, was unbearable. I put it up for sale and got rid of it as fast as I could. I didn't even care about losing the money. I just needed it gone. I needed to get out of the house. We'd had another fight. One of those stupid, circular arguments that went nowhere, but somehow left me feeling gutted. It wasn't even about anything important, but I just couldn't take being in the same space with him, breathing the same air. So I grabbed my jacket and left, not even bothering to tell him where I was going. It was late, but the air was cool and crisp, exactly what I needed, and the park was only a few blocks away. I'd been there 1,000 times. The park was quiet, just like I needed. The kind of quiet that made you feel small in the best way, like all the stuff that weighed on you didn't matter out here. I stuck to the paved path, keeping away from the woods. The woods out here in Washington aren't like trees in other places. They're serious. They're old and towering, and at night they stand like dark, impenetrable walls, hiding whatever they want inside. But as I walked, breathing in the damp air, my mind started to settle. The anger that had been a tight coil in my chest loosened. It was one of those nights where you could almost forget everything and breathe again. I started to feel it before I heard it. That prickling sensation you get when you're not alone, when something isn't right. At first, I thought it was just my nerves playing tricks on me. I was alone in a park at night, after all. It wasn't exactly the safest decision, but it wasn't the first time I'd come out here to clear my head. Then I heard it. Something moving beyond the tree line. A soft rustling like footsteps brushing through the leaves. I slowed down, my heart rate immediately picking up again. I told myself it was probably just a deer or a raccoon. Something in my mind said it wasn't. The same instinct that keeps you from walking down dark alleys. I turned my head toward the trees, scanning the thick underbrush, but I couldn't see anything. The darkness was solid, swallowing everything more than a few feet in. But the sound continued. It was closer now, like it was keeping pace with me. My heart thudded in my chest and my mouth was dry. My hands trembled as I pulled my phone out, unlocking it with shaking fingers. I turned on the flashlight, the weak beam cutting into the darkness. The light bounced over the trees, the leaves glistening with dew in the cold night air. Nothing. I told myself, just keep walking, just keep moving, and it'll be fine. But then I saw them. Eyes. 2 glowing points of light deep in the trees, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. At first, I thought it might be an animal, maybe a raccoon or a stray cat. But those eyes, they didn't move. They just stared at me, unwavering, locked onto me like they'd been watching the whole time. I stared back, frozen in place. The eyeshine flickered as the thing blinked, slowly, deliberately. That was the moment I knew I wasn't looking at a deer or a raccoon or anything else that was supposed to be in these woods. Only big things blink slowly like that. Things that know they don't have to be afraid of you. I heard a twig snap, loud and sharp, and that was it. My body took over before my brain could even catch up. I turned and bolted, sprinting down the path as fast as I could, my feet pounding against the pavement, breath coming out in ragged gasps. I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. I couldn't hear it anymore, but I knew it was still back there, just beyond the trees, watching, maybe deciding whether to follow. By the time I reached my street, I was drenched in sweat. My lungs were burning from the effort. But I didn't slow down until I reached my front door and fumbled with my keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice before finally getting the door open. I slammed it behind me, locking both locks. I stood there, leaning against the door, my whole body heaving. The house was dark, empty now, except for the sound of my own breathing. I never told anyone about that night. Not my boyfriend, not my friends. I didn't even go back to that park again. But sometimes I have to drive by those woods, and I think about those eyes and wonder why it was keeping pace with me that night, watching me in the dark, and why it didn't follow. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more weekly stories. If there are topics you'd like me to cover or stories you'd like to submit for me to read, please leave a comment and send them to my email address in the description. If you'd like to support my work, please give me a like, comment, and definitely share these stories with your friends. It really helps. You can also do some shopping at the Lady Grimm store. There's a link here as a QR code and in the description. Thanks again, and see you next week.